I feel exhausted right now, and I just came back from a drink of water. And there are cars driving down the street sometimes, and it's kind of interrupting me. But I decided to record this review instead of waiting any further to do it because I'm going to lose the motivation to do it. I believe, I don't know, I don't typically do that. Anyhow. Hello, and welcome to Swallowing Paper, where we get to it instead of around it. That's to say, I'm allergic to preliminaries as well as recording the same review 4 times in a row. In the past, the only book I've read from Albert Camus was La Peste, or The Plague, and while I loved the work, there were details I found to be evident of Camus rushing to get the book finished. I surmised that it was a deadline encroaching on his writing time, but anyhow, the book was nice, apart from the ending. And L'étranger, or The Stranger, rather than steady progression, as is the majority of The Plague, The Stranger begins with what feels like Camus throwing things at the page, seeing what would stick, giving us an overwhelming start of seemingly random exposition. And as opposed to what I'd read in The Plague, the prose is far less denser, a whole lot simpler, so at the time I thought of it as a drawback. But the further I read, the more I understood Camus' reason for the simplicity, which is to help efficiently convey the type of person the narrator is. A simple, passive man, even though that doesn't quite explain the poor pacing right out the gate. The Stranger's opening prioritizes that tell, don't show kind of writing, the kind of writing that reminds you that this was the writer's first published novel. But the further you read, the more the proliferation of random information begins to falter, until it becomes Camus taking his time with the story, so we begin to read actual scenes fleshed out on the page for the reader to absorb comfortably. A car passed, and it is then where one realizes that the narrator is narrating their indifference to the things of life, primarily his mother's passing, or these frequent sexcapades with a girl by the name of Marie whom he doesn't believe he loves, or his various annoyances, if not peculiar characters in his area. While I enjoyed the characters in The Plague, I found those in A Stranger to be far more memorable, even if they were overwhelming.
Underwhelming. I meant to say underwhelming.
But given that the writing was easily digestible, I continued. After all, this book was long overdue. And at the time of me recording this, I don't think the characters are really poignant, really. they didn't really leave a mark, I guess.
I don't know how I stretched poignant into 3 syllables there, but I meant to say poignant.
During the scene where the narrator murders the man in the red sand, which, strangely enough, isn't a spoiler, I found Camus' writing to be at the height of its powers, a phrase I read in Camus' biography at the end of the book concerning his death via accident, which, to be frank, is far more absurd than his fiction. Also, I can't even say that I actually read that at the back of the book at this point. I can't remember. It was at this point in which I realized what territory the book would populate. Then it wasn't long for me to notice that I'd have to tread through its downward spiral, in a narrative manner, because the book only got better from that moment onward, the moment life was made worse for the narrator, further elaborating the novel's absurdist tenets, many of which are compelling, but not exactly anything I described to. The novel would soon recapitulate the events in the first half of the book and toss them under a new light, altering their significance, augmenting the indifferent man's damnation, showcasing the absurdity of people not only doing their jobs, but of people erecting institutions which are supposed to benefit them, yet are unable to take account of the nuance in their daily lives, hence the first half of the novel. Soon enough, we get into more existential territory, focusing on our impermanence in relation to a death sentence, and on the fact that, according to our surroundings and the time spent in them, people get used to their conditions if they haven't already, which, while I found that to be true on more than one level, I still found it ironic considering Camus built a career on never getting used to life itself, but that's because many of us never do. And in the context of religion, having read The Plague, I noticed that Camus has a tendency to victimize his characters, and while I'm aware of the oppression religious groups have enacted not simply on the non-religious but on people of other religious standpoints, I found that Camus' people of religion are simply caricatures in his novels, lacking the very nuance he aimed to detail in his writing, which I find to be a skewing in representation to further legitimize his thoughts on religion as a whole, compromising his own writing to the point of becoming a trope in itself. But that's to say that I agree in some regard, especially when people assume roles of power and impose their beliefs on others, which, to their detriment, makes those people all the less receptive to their cause, thus becoming demons of their own making, which makes them all the more repelling. The Stranger is what I imagine reading a Kafka story feels like, save for the surreal nature of his narratives. And while that's been said, I've no interest in reading either of their works for the time being, gravitating toward poetry for now, plus a few contemporary works I have on hand. Not to mention that I am reading A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. That aside, I believe Samuel Beckett's work illustrates the absurd with greater intensity, becoming all the more tangible in comparison. But I thought that this was a nice read worth my while, flaws and all. Alright, goodbye.